Welcome back to FAMWISE. This is lesson number 7, charting your basal body temperature. So in this lesson, we're going to be covering what is your BBT, how to chart it, and what it means. Let's get into it. So what is BBT? So BBT stands for basal body temperature, and this is a measure of your resting basic metabolic rate. There's going to be a surge of progesterone after ovulation, and this raises your metabolic rate and thus your temperature. So BBT helps us to confirm ovulation. You can see on the chart that once we have ovulated with those humps there, so we have estrogen raised, LH and FSH have all raised, ovulation occurs with the star, and then we have that rise in progesterone. That is where you're going to get your temperature shift. Your temperature doesn't raise that much, but it does raise slightly and noticeably. So it's going to raise 0.2 to 0.5 degrees Celsius or 0.4 to 1 degree Fahrenheit. So how do you actually track your temperature? You're going to use just a thermometer. So you don't need like a super high tech one. You can just purchase one to either 1 to 2 decimal places. And approximately these are like $10 to $20 on Amazon or at your local drugstore. If you are searching on Amazon, you can look up ovulation thermometer, basal body thermometer, or thermometer to 2 decimal places. There are other options as well, like the Oura Ring, Temp Drop, or the Apple Watch, or Natural Cycles. So instead of using a thermometer every day, you can just get one of those, which will measure your average sleep temperature, but not your BBT. So you can't get the information about your metabolism because using a thermometer, it's going to give you that basal body temperature. But the helpful thing with the device is that it's easy, it's quick, and if you're prone to like wake ups or your night shift, or if you are postpartum, you have a little one that is keeping you awake, or just like you simply don't want to take your temperature every single morning, these can be a great option because again, it's taking your average temperature and that can help if you have a lot of different fluctuations. But for starters, and at some point, I do recommend using the thermometer to see your basal body temperature, to see if there's any health indicators. And then once you get more comfortable, you can switch to a device if you like. If you already have one of those devices, you can definitely keep using it if you find that's working for you, and then pair it with like your cervical mucus or your cervical position to figure out if you are in your fertile window or not. So you want to take your temperature throughout your entire cycle. So tackle your temperature first thing in the morning before getting out of bed, drinking water, going to the bathroom, or having even a conversation. So you also want to make sure that you got at least 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep. And this is because after a consistent 5 hours of sleep, the body resets and goes down to a minimum energy expenditure. So we can measure this by taking our temperature before getting out of bed and moving around. You're also going to have to take it the exact same way every time. So most people do orally, but you can also do under the arm, which is auxiliary, or you can do it vaginally as well. Some people find that vaginally can give them better temperature readings. So if you find you're having a hard time like deciphering it, if we have crazy temperatures, you could try vaginally, but make sure that you're doing it the same way the entire cycle. Another method that's really helpful if you have crazy temperatures is making sure that you're leaving the thermometer in place when you're checking for a full 10 minutes before you take the reading. And this is in order to get the most accurate reading. I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but it can help to really like steady the temperature. And a lot of people find that they have an easier time reading their chart. And of course, once you take your temperature, make sure you are charting it down or you're putting it into your app. For you guys starting out, you're going to be charting it on the paper chart. So again, we're just going to go over the rules of how to get an accurate temperature reading. Minimum 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Aim to take your temperature on the same time every single day within about 2 hours. Take your temperature from the same place, leave it in place for 10 minutes, and then record. So there are various factors that can affect your temperature reading. So that's things like illness, fever, alcohol consumption, travel, or like time zone changes, daylight savings time, night wakings and restless sleep, sleeping longer than you normally would. And this is because the longer that you sleep past your normal time, the more your temperature can naturally rise. Food allergies and seasonal allergies, anything that like triggers your immune system, like getting sick, taking your temperature after you've already gotten out of bed, drinking water or tea before taking your temperature orally, switching how or where you take your temperature, and then also switching thermometers. And this is because if you replace that thermometer, it might give a slightly different reading than last. So some women are very sensitive to to like the slightest variations in their habits, but most aren't, thankfully. So what affects one woman might not affect another. So you'll have to experiment with what disrupts yours and then keep that in mind as well. So a little trick with this is to record the temperatures that are taken at the same time with the same amount of sleep, and in another color record temperatures that have possibly changed, like you drank before, or like you had alcohol the night before, or you got up to pee, or you had restless sleep. Then also, if you experience these different factors, still take your temperature, but just note what happened. And then we know if we need to, we can like exclude that temperature from our chart. And then that can help you feel more confident in interpreting it. So given those rules, it can sound like a lot and it can sound a little overwhelming, but it's okay. You really don't need to go overboard with it. Just take your temperature every single day, even if it's not like the perfect situation. You don't need to wake up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday just to take your temperature at the same time. Just get into the habit of making notes, and if disturbances that could affect your temperature, such as like getting up later or earlier in the morning, getting up in the middle of the night, having restless sleep, just note those down. And then within a few cycles, you'll understand what factors affect your cycle and which ones don't affect your cycle as much. So again, what is BBT actually doing? Can our basal body temperature help to predict that ovulation is coming? No, that is not what it does. So once you ovulate, the corpus luteum produces high amounts of progesterone, and this is a thermogenic hormone and increases your body's resting metabolism, thus increasing your BBT. So what your basal body temperature can actually do is help to confirm ovulation and predict when your period will come. So once we have that increase in our basal body temperature, that is suggesting that progesterone is now being made in high amounts. And then we're also going to cross-check that with our mucus. Once we have confirmed that, your luteal phase is pretty consistent, right? So if your luteal phase is always like 12 days or 14 days, we're just going to tag that on to when we ovulated, and then that is likely the day that you will get your period. So how do we actually chart basal body temperature? So first, you're going to take your temperature, and then if you are paper charting like we are when we were starting, we're going to be rounding down to the nearest decimal point. So if your temperature, you're using like a 2 decimal point thermometer, if it was 97.56, that means we would be rounding down to 97.5. If your temperature was 97.54, we would also be rounding down to 97.5. If you're using a temperature which is just to 1 decimal point, just read it as is. And then next, we're going to record and connect. You can see on the image on the right, the numbers on the very bottom would be 97, and then the numbers above it is like 97.1, 97.2, all the way up to 97.9. And then we have 98, and then the same thing with the numbers above, so 98.1, 98.2, and so forth. So you can see how on the bottom of the chart, we have like the numbers in gray. So like day number 4, our temperature there would be 97 degrees. The next one we have is 97.4, and then we're going to circle them and connect them with a line just for like an easy visual. If we're moving more towards where we see that temperature shift to the right, we had a temperature that was raised on day 21, which was 97.9. And then we had 98 degrees, and then we skipped a day. And then we had on the 25th, a 98.3. When you are recording, you're going to be noting any unusual events like illness, travel, sleep disturbances, or if you drink alcohol. For me personally, if I do have like even 1 glass of wine, I notice that my temperature can be a little funky. So make sure you are charting that down. Again, that will kind of differ if that affects you or not. And then once we are completing our chart, then we can omit any aberrant temperatures. So aberrant meaning that something is not of typical standard. For example, that there is like an outlier. So you can see how on day 14, we had a 97.8. That one was kind of out of our typical range. So we can just leave that as an outliner, and then we can connect the ones on either side. Once you have your temperatures, and once you notice that increase in temperature for 3 days, that would be day 21, 22, and 23, this is how to draw your cover line. So your cover line is separating your pre and post ovulatory temperatures. And what we're going to do is once we notice that we have an increase in temperature, we're going to identify the previous 6 normal temperatures and then draw your cover line right above the highest of those 6. So you can see how the highest of the previous temperatures were 97.5. So we're going to draw our line right above that. And you only do this once you get 3 raised temperatures. Post-ovulatory temperatures should stay above the baseline for the rest of your cycle. And you could have an outlier in the post-ovulatory phase, but most of the time they're all above that cover line. And the temperature will drop at the end of the cycle right before your period comes. So this is how you confirm ovulation using your temperature. So ovulation usually occurs the day prior to your temperature shift. So you will see a sustained thermal shift, and we look for 3 normal temperatures that are higher than the previous 6 normal. This shift needs to be clear and obvious. Your temperature stays up above the cover line until your period, and your temperature shift lines up with your cervical mucus and or cervical position changes. So on the chart, you can see how we have 3 raised temperatures that are above the previous 6 temperatures. Thus, we can confirm ovulation. They stay raised until the end where the temperatures drop right before our period as our hormones drop. And of course, we're going to be cross-checking our BBT with our cervical mucus and or cervical position. So to confirm the ovulation has taken place, we're going to wait until all our biomarkers match up. So we have a shift from mucus to dry days. We have that sustained thermal shift, so 3 consecutive temperatures higher than our previous 6. And then we can also use our cervical position that returns to a low and firm position. So how do you know if your temperatures are actually normal? Normal pre-ovulatory temperature should consistently be above 36.4 Celsius or 97.5 Fahrenheit, up to 36.8 Celsius or 98.2 Fahrenheit. Normal post-ovulatory temperatures should be higher, with at least one temperature higher than 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 Fahrenheit. Consistently low temperatures can be a sign of low cell metabolism. So basal body temperature is a marker of your resting metabolism, right? So it can give you info about your thyroid health. So if temperatures are excessively low in like the 96s or the low 97s pre-ovulatory, it may point to a hypothyroid and may warrant further investigation. This can also suggest a nutrition deficiency, so should be looked at further. So what if your temperature is not rising at all and you're just getting like the same consistent pattern? That would mean that you are not ovulating, because if we are ovulating, we're going to get that temperature raise. And if you are on birth control, that could also affect that. Same with if you just came off of birth control, that can affect your temperatures as well. And if your temperatures are crazy, you could try that 10-minute rule. You could try vaginally, or again, you could get a device like Temp Drop or Aura. And that is all for this lesson, all about basal body temperature, how to chart it, how to interpret it to confirm ovulation. I will have an example with like a full charting tutorial for like cervical mucus, cervical position, along with basal body temperature. So if you're more curious on how to do that, rewatch this video. That can be helpful. Just try taking your temperature again. We're going to be learning by doing, and then also watch that example as well in further modules. And I will see you guys in the next lesson all about cervical position.